I believe that working a door is more important than how you enter a room, because if you don't work the door properly, you might not make it into the room anyways. At best, you could be trying to move to the nearest piece of cover while taking gunfire, or at worst, lying in a puddle of your own blood. Every person at every level has made and will make mistakes during real-world CQB clearings. This might surprise you because what you're mostly used to seeing on YouTube and Instagram are highlight reels. No one really wants to show you what it looks like when dudes enter a structure they haven't been in 1,000 times, because it will show you just how flawed and impossible CQB really is. In some of my CQB videos, whether it's Ukraine or Israel, I commonly get comments relating to how they suck at CQB. It's not that they suck, it's that you're not used to seeing the reality. CQB is exceptionally more difficult during sustained combat operations because there are constant threats, constant variables, fatigue, literal exhaustion, malnutrition, sleep deprivation, etc. If you're not new to this channel, then you know what I do is look at the way things are done and then provide you what I think is the safer way of doing that same thing. I had to use this video without the original audio because the original video had Tupac music playing in the background, and that would be a copyright issue for me. I posted this video as a short, and I think some people are confused on what exactly is happening, so I'll go over that first. Now, what we see here is the operators going house to house, street to street, basically clearing these high-rise buildings, which I assume are probably apartments. You see them moving up the stairwell. They're holding coverage on the next landing, and then the operators behind them are pushing up, holding coverage on that next landing, and then the other operators are pushing behind them until they get all the way up. This clip right here is a good example of why it's probably a good idea to do as much of the work outside the room before going in, because we know that when we go into the room during CQB, we're supposed to be hitting our pods and creating angles. Well, not only in combat, but also in the civilian side, more often than not, you actually can't run your routes because you're impeded by all of these things on the floor, this junk. And so if we don't do that work outside of the room, it's that much more dangerous if we don't do that and we go inside the room, because we're not even able to create the angles that CQB says that we should be creating. And so doing as much work outside the room before going in, doing a threshold evaluation is almost always ideal, and you'll almost always end up doing it anyways. This is the first door that they come to where they, in my opinion, kind of don't work it properly and could have mitigated a potential issue from occurring. You see the point guy stepping up and standing in front of the door, opening the door, and then you see the number 2 man, he's basically directly in front of the door as the door comes open. Again, we should be mitigating gunfire coming through the door as soon as that door starts moving or starts opening. We can't do that if we're standing directly in front of the door. So they could have mitigated this potential threat by setting up on the door properly, that point guy setting up off to the left of the door, and then using that hard corner that would be to the right of the door as you're looking at it to be up on the gun, using that corner as some level of cover. When that point man opens that door, getting immediate eyes in there to the center. Again, we're mitigating that potential gunfire coming at us, giving us the best opportunity to return gunfire, and then going ahead and entering after that. Now, just because we set up on the door properly doesn't mean it's going to work. So they might have to resort to what they did here. You set up on the door properly, you try to get the door open, but say it's impeded or it's not quite coming open, and you just have to resort to this other way of doing it. I still prefer doing it that way, because if somebody's standing there, sitting there in a position looking at the door, there's a good chance they would have started shooting at the door anyways. And even though we weren't able to get the door open. This clip is the main discussion for this video. You see the point guy approaching the door, standing directly in front of the door, and opening that door. And as the door comes open, you see his gun is down and he's immediately exposed to the left of the door, which would be the basement area. Now, in the short that I posted, some people said that that area was covered, but it could not have been covered immediately because this operator pushed up forward and would have cut off the field of fire for that operator to the right of him. But some of the things that remain the same no matter what door it is we're working is that we want to stay away from the immediate front of the door, and we also want to at least conceal ourselves from view as the door comes open. We also want to try to work the door from the knob side so we can mitigate one of the issues you saw in that video, which is reaching across the door, because we should be anticipating as soon as we begin to work this door, taking gunfire through the door. There's no real good way to mitigate that other than staying away from the immediate front of the door. Also, being on the knob side, we're able to create a little bit more leverage on the door and not compromise our position as the number 2 guy on that opposing side of the door. So as I approach the door and this door is partially cracked open, I can take away, for the most part, that hard corner right there, depending on how deep the room is. And again, my partner on the other side can set up properly so that when the door comes open, he is not having to manipulate the door in any way. Now, there's a couple different ways you can work this door, but my goal is to not only stay away from the door, the immediate front of the door, but also stay away from as much drywall or threshold as I can as I work the door. Bad guys do not take random guesses through drywall, but they do sometimes hit the drywall or the wall in conjunction with shooting at the threshold. Again, bad guys don't take random guesses through drywall. It's something that I will continue to address on this channel because it's something that keeps coming up. You can go find these videos all over the place. They exist. What doesn't exist is bad guys taking random guesses through things. Occasionally it happens, but typically it doesn't. And this is just the most recent example I could find of that. These officers are attempting to locate this individual who is armed with a handgun, and I believe that they believe he may be trying to go into a random person's apartment, so they're trying to move quickly to locate him. And you'll see from the drone footage where the suspect is sitting, he's directly next to one of these plywood fences that separates these patios from each other. And so the question becomes, if bad guys or drywall doesn't protect you and bad guys take random guesses through drywall, well, why doesn't this individual attempt to shoot the officers through the drywall? Because he can hear them coming, right? They're not being quiet. They really can't. And their lights are all over the place. So why does he actually wait until he sees them or can make a strong guess as to where they are before he starts shooting? Well, that's because we associate our eyes, muzzle to the target. And so that is telling us if I align these things, then I will be able to hit this person versus taking a random guess through drywall. It doesn't mean that they have to actually see you, but again, they want to increase the likelihood that they will hit you, and they do that by associating things in the environment that are happening before they start engaging. So, for example, a door moving. Why do we know that bad guys shoot a lot of times at doors and sometimes hit the drywall next to the door? Well, because now they know the officers are there, and they believe that once the door is moving, you're either coming through the door or you're somewhere in the immediate front of the door where you shouldn't be. So the farther away I can be from the threshold itself, technically, I believe the safer you can be from that immediate volley of gunfire. So I come up this direction. I see, for the most part, there's nothing in that hard corner. We still have to 100% verify that. I've seen people keep the rifle in their shoulder and work the door with their hand. If that's something that you could do, that's an option. I've seen people use their muzzle to work the door and get the door open. I don't really prefer that. What I prefer to do, because it gives me the most distance away from the threshold, is to simply brace myself up against the wall and use my foot to get the door open. Now from here, at least my vitals are 3.5 feet, 3 feet away from the threshold, which is really good. And then from here, I can start working the angle inside the room as my partner on the other side is doing the same. Now you could say that those guys knew that they were coming to a door that had a return on it, and the way that they work that door with return is that this person on the other side reaches across and opens the door. And yes, that would most likely be the way, or a way, that you could work that door, simply because depending on the strength of the return, I may not have enough energy or put enough energy into the door to swing it open far enough to where my partner on the other side can grab the door without compromising himself, or pin the door with his foot without compromising himself. And so what I would say to that is a door with a return on it, if you have the manpower, could be a 3-person deal. So we have our guy set up on the side of the door over here, and we have our guy working the door. He's going to do the same thing, except for the fact as he manipulates the door and pulls the door open, the number 3 guy is actually going to be the one to pin the door and cover the guy that is working the door. Now, something that you can do, and I'm sure they were doing as well, regardless of the facility you've been in or the building that you're currently in doing your work, say a school, for example, if you're in a hallway and you work one door and then you go to the next door down, there's a good chance that that door works the same. And so I know that these operators were moving building to building, and so there's a good chance that they probably assumed that the door that they were coming to was a door with a functioning return on it. And again, reaching across the door is something that can be done. Instead of doing that in the moment, noticing that the door is propped open, only two things can be true. Either the door is propped open because it's impeded, or the return isn't actually working. And so instead of overextending yourself and kind of compromising yourself, you can simply just kind of call an audible while you're moving. So if we're approaching that door and I see that it's propped open or potentially the return isn't working, I would just say something like this: me, 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 me. That's telling my partner he doesn't have to overextend himself and compromise himself in front of the door. I can work the door from this side. Now, people might say something like, well, I'm worried about my balance, or I'm worried about working the door with my foot. That's a decision that you can make if that's what you want to do. I choose to stay as far away from the threshold as I can versus getting closer to use my hand or to use my gun or something like that. To me, I am mitigating that initial response from somebody who is inside the room and actually ready to shoot and willing to shoot. Tactics, and especially CQB, is a very emotional conversation for some people. And in the YouTube short that I made of this video, there were obviously a number of comments, and I wanted to read some of those comments because I believe that they provide some unique insight and perspective. So one person said, imagine making a video of soldiers in actual combat that you know nothing about. The irony, right? Well, I don't need to know anything about them. I don't need to know what their training was, where they grew up, to look at something objectively and tell you that it's incorrect. If somebody is teaching people how to walk backwards, or you should walk backwards into a room when conducting CQB, I don't need to know anything about them to know that that is probably incorrect and more dangerous. Somebody else wrote, this footage is literally used by some of the guys in the 4th Battalion ILDU, Ukrainian military, as what not to do. You don't need to be actively baking a cake yourself to know when a cake is burnt. I thought that was some unique insight and kind of funny. Someone said, as someone who foes CQB at a professional level, I'm not sure if they misspelled something there, you don't have to have done CQB as a job to know how to do it and the do's and don'ts. I don't disagree with that. Someone else said, this entry was 100% wrong, no debating about it. If that building was occupied, all 3 dudes at that door are dead. Well, the building was occupied. Later in the video, I'm not sure if I've gotten that far or if I'll show it to you, they get into a gunfight with dudes on an upper level. There's grenades being thrown down at them, and ultimately they send drones from the outside into the building and end up destroying those guys. Someone else said, everywhere that I have ever been taught in CQB, I was taught that it is always wrong to stand in front of the door or doorway as it is opened, as long as there is any way possible to not be standing in front of the door. I agree with that as well. Sometimes the environment forces you to be there. And what I say is sometimes you are served a shit sandwich and somebody has to eat it. And there's just nothing that you can do about that. Unfortunately, some people care more about the person giving the information than the information itself, and I have cautioned you all in the past about doing that, and I would continue to encourage you to just objectively look at the information and decide for yourself, or maybe ask other people, is it wrong or is it right? It doesn't matter if I draw it up on a whiteboard, or it's a video of an officer doing a clearing, or it's a video of a Navy SEAL doing a clearing. We can all look at it objectively and say, is this common practice or is this not? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like it, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and if you feel so inclined, you could tell me how you really feel about it in the comments.